The Appalachian Trail in the United States is one of the world's most famous hiking trails, spanning more than 2,000 miles and crossing 14 states. Geologists discovered it was once part of an ancient mountain range stretching all the way from America to Europe. And so in recent years, new chapters of the International Trail were created, including our very own one here in Ulster. I'm Lolly Spence, a tour guide and Ulster-Scots historian.
And I'm Mark Thompson, born and bred in the Ards. In this series, we'll be exploring the 300-mile route across 4 counties, passing through some of the most picturesque locations in Ulster. For centuries, thousands of people left these shores to travel to the wild landscapes of the American Appalachians. They became known as the Scotch-Irish.
The people we meet in this journey will help us explore our enduring links with the Appalachian region, as well as our own Ulster-Scots language and heritage. Join us as we go Walkin Hame. So far, we've trekked around 50 miles of the International Appalachian Trail, from Larne to Glenanne. For the next leg of our journey, we're still on the Antrim Coast, between Ballycastle and Ballintoy, at the dramatic ruins of Kinbane Castle, a place with ancient links across the water to Scotland.
Ollie, this is amazing.
Yeah, it's a very special place, isn't it, here on this promontory?
My goodness. I've never been here before. But look at the setting, too.
It's an estate agent's dream.
It's something else, this. It
House
really
with a
is.
view.
And a wee bit of Scotland visible there. Islay, and Kintyre, west side of Rathlin. It is just fabulous. So what's the story of the castle?
Kinbane Castle, the white head, because we're on a chalk outcrop here because it's built on the white limestone. But the castle itself is built of the natural basalt because we have those two, the black and white rocks of the Antrim Coast.
So this is one of those network of MacDonald castles that were both in Antrim and also across in the Western Isles.
Yeah, probably the most famous is Dunluce on round, but fewer people come to this one. The MacDonalds were the lords of the Isles for quite a period of the kingdom of Dalriada, which straddled the Irish Sea from southwest Scotland to northeast Ulster.
Yeah, and connected by the waters of Moyle, not separated by them, but joined by them.
Yeah.
This entire coastline is so heavily promoted and marketed, yet this is honestly a new discovery for me.
This is one of the great things about this new Appalachian Trail, is it takes people off the beaten track and helps us to explore and discover new corners of our own country. Personally, I know this part of the world, but I can't wait to get out into Tyrone and out into Donegal and find new parts of this path.
Yeah, let's keep going. From Kinbane Castle, our route takes us along the coast, overlooking Benbane Head. With its sweeping vistas of the Sea of Moyle, the narrowest expanse of water in the North Channel between Northern Ireland and Scotland, this is a place steeped in ancient mythology connecting our two lands. There are plenty of stories around this coastline.
Yeah, you know, this is the home of the sea god, Mussenden Temple, and he had a magic boat and various magic properties. But he was descended from King Lear, and the more famous legend around these parts is the story of the children of King Lear. He had got 4 beloved children, a daughter and 3 sons, but when he married the evil stepmother, she turned them into swans and condemned them to fly over the lands of Ireland for 900 years, 300 over Mayo, 300 over Westmeath, and 300 here over the Sea of Moyle, before eventually they came back on shore and were baptised and are buried. There's a beautiful sculpture of them in Ballycastle which shows the 4 flying silver swans.
Well, I have an old original tourist poster from the 20s or 30s, whenever tourism promotion became a proper industry. This beautiful image of the classic legend of the Red Hand being severed and thrown ashore. And in the big caption at the bottom, they specify that that took place here on the seas of Moyle.
From Benbean Head, the path meanders along the Causeway coast and past another iconic landmark steeped in ancient Irish and Scottish stories, the Giant's Causeway. From here, it passes through the popular holiday destinations of Portrush and Portstewart. As we leave the Antrim Coast behind, we cross over into County Londonderry and head south to our next stop on the outskirts of Coleraine, one of Ulster's longest rivers, the Bann.
There's a rich seafaring tradition between this part of the country and Scotland, from where people have been coming to settle for thousands of years. To find out more about it, we're meeting up with local maritime historian and sailor, Dr. Robin Ruddock. Well, Robin, folk often talk about 4 centuries of connections, but when you come to a place like this, it's far, far more ancient than that.
We're on the Bann estuary. This was the main road for settlement of Ireland, and we actually have up at Coleraine, up at Mount Sandal, we have the first settlement site in Ireland about 10,000 years ago it dates back to. The evidence we find is actually in the likes of this. These flint knives that we still find in the river are around 10,000 years old. So it's actually lovely to travel by boat in the footsteps or in the wake of those first settlers.
So these were hunter-gatherers using their flints and
Yep.
as harpoons? Or
Yeah, well, the flint was available down on the beaches like the White Rocks, and the food was plentiful. At the cuts, you have a waterfall, a natural waterfall. So the migration of eels and salmon, which this river is famous for, the food was literally at their feet. So all they needed was a knife like that for a few thousand years. So the geology actually helped these people to settle here. So the Appalachian Trail actually passes these sites where the flint was found.
So these people arrived here by sea.
Yeah.
What would those early boats have been like?
Almost certainly they were using skin-covered craft. So they were made with a frame, basically like a basket covered in animal hides. And Ireland is unique in a way in that we still have skin-covered boats, currachs, in use, but those boats are absolutely seaworthy. We have actually voyaged up to Scotland in similar craft. We got a 38-foot currach made to voyage from Derry to Iona. So we know that those crossings were easily possible.
And they had no maritime apparatus or compasses or anything. Were they navigating with the stars, or how do you think they are landmarks maybe?
Well, we can see Scotland when you're on the north coast. It's only 25 miles across the Isla, and the closest point at the Mull of Kintyre to Fairhead is only around 12 miles, so they could easily see where they were going.
And you've preserved a very particular type of boat design here.
Yeah, the boat that we have is a Drontham, which is a corruption from Trondheim, the name Trondheim in Norway. And around 300 years ago, when ships came in from Norway bringing timber to Ireland, they also brought these boats. And then local boat builders and fishermen were using them on our coastline. And these were the workhorses of their day. They were used for fishing primarily. They were used for seaweed gathering as well. So people who emigrated from this North Ulster area would have taken that knowledge with them, and we find a very similar type of boat on Lake Michigan called the Mackinaw boat, and in that area they have what are almost exact copies of the boat that we'd be in today.
Whenever large-scale migration became possible, the Bann and Coleraine are very important in that era as well.
They are the immigrant ships that passed along our coast. Our harbours were not developed enough for ships of that size to come in. So these boats were used to actually transport the people. There are steps still in Portrush Harbour in the inner dock, right by the restaurants there, the pilgrim steps. And those are the last steps that people would have stood on before they got into one of these Dronthams that took them out to the ships to emigrate.
Well, I'm really excited now to be heading out on the Bann in this beautiful boat.
Get the experience of it, yep.
Mark, we're coming up the Bann today on a beautiful, sunny, relatively calm day. It's still a little bit choppy and you can definitely feel the power of the water. It must have been an astonishing experience heading off to start a new life in a different country.
Well, those transatlantic journeys are really important. You know, there'd been Ulster-Scots communities leaving East Donegal for Delaware and Maryland as early as maybe the 1670s. But here in the Bann, 1718, was where the Bann Valley exodus took place. And 5 shiploads, carrying maybe about 300 or 400 people, set sail across the Atlantic for Boston. One of them ended up in Sasko Bay in Maine, but that's where they all settled, in that northern end of the Appalachian Mountains.
What was the reason for that big wave of Presbyterian emigration? Why were they leaving?
Well, in that time, it was the generation who had experienced the siege of Derry and all of the death and horror. And government persecution was reintroduced, particularly against Presbyterians, and they travelled with hope of a better life and a new life.
Led by their ministers?
Yep, there was 2 or 3 ministers who led them across there.
You see, over 300 years later, to actually think about that, 5 entire congregations with the conviction or the belief or the difficult circumstances that they had to uproot with all their belongings and cross the Atlantic to start a new life. It's hard to conceive.
Well, they take a lot of memories with them too, and even there today in that part of the world, the northern section of the Appalachian Mountains, there's a Derry, there's a Londonderry, there's a Newry, there's a Coleraine, and down on the shore there's a Belfast, and about 10 miles south of that there's a Bangor. So they're transplanting Ulster into northern Appalachia.
After crossing the mighty Bann, the trail heads back up toward the coast to the beautiful downhill beach, overlooked by the 18th century Mussenden Temple. I'm walking this section of the trail with Anne McMaster, an Ulster-Scots poet who's experienced life on both sides of the Atlantic. The Bard of Tyrone, Reverend W.F. Marshall, when he was the minister here in Castle Rock, wrote, "There's a splendour where the great seas roll along a northern strand." What a place.
He was right. He was so right. And on a day like today, you have to think there's nothing better. Recharges the soul, doesn't it?
It certainly does.
Yeah.
Well, Anne, we are walking the International Appalachian Trail, and we're thinking about people and the landscape and everything that connects us. And in many ways, you embody that interconnectedness across the Atlantic.
Accidentally, but yes, absolutely. I spent a number of years in California and then got to travel through the Appalachians and then found myself back in Northern Ireland in the middle of a beautiful rural area and a coastline that's second to none.
In your experience, are Americans, particularly down that Appalachian range, are they aware of the connection back to us?
It's growing. The awareness is growing, which is wonderful. And in the Appalachian area, it has always been so. Very much so. And there's that real powerful connection between our 2 areas of land.
So in the last almost a decade or so, you've been writing poetry, is that right?
That's right. My earlier life was working as a playwright because I was lecturing in theatre and fell accidentally into writing plays and loved it, absolutely adored it. And then about 7 years ago, I decided, right, I want to make a change. And I went to a wonderful workshop with the Scottish poet Stuart Patterson, and something clicked. And I began to realise that I had a language that I had forgotten, that he allowed me to rediscover again. So I owe him a great deal.
This was Ulster-Scots.
That's right, absolutely.
Euler now, clabbered to the oxters, Welton's thick wi' muck and glar, hefting a newborn calf across a winter field, it rescued from a shock and drowning in the water. I carry this foundered wee beast, slippery, starving and near still, heavy in my arms, while its mother, wild wi' fright, loses the heed and gives chase. Wild and wake, he'd low, guldern frae her throat, skiting and high-stepping through the mud into madness. This living tongue was one I once misplaced. Moving out into the world, I withdrew from it, laid it by. Now I am ready to taste these words again, set them loose upon my tongue, this newly remembered voice, my coming home.
There's something about writing in Ulster-Scots that is bone deep, it's visceral, and it's really powerful. So when I'm writing about nature or I'm writing about memories, I'm speaking the language that I really know.
And it connects to your history and your heritage and landscape. And I'm sure for the Scots-Irish poets in Appalachia, the landscape was vastly different from what they would have known over here. What does it look like across there?
It's incredibly green in the same way, but the scale of it is outstandingly different. And I can only imagine what it must have been like for folk to come to the area and to explore huge tracts of wood, because it's a massively wooded area, and to discover soil that would grow things for them, but to have all the different races that they would come up against and all the people who were coming over in addition to themselves. And when you travelled, as you did in those days, you left everything behind. What more powerful than to carry the language of home with you?
While Lolly's been on the coast, I've been taking the trail west to Binevenagh Mountain. This area of outstanding natural beauty marks the western extent of the Antrim Plateau. It dominates the skyline and offers panoramic views over Lough Foyle, Inishowen and the west coast of Scotland. One woman who has immersed herself in the life of this place is the Scottish-born broadcaster, Helen Mark.
Well, Helen, it is lovely to be in your part of the country.
Yeah. Now, you're in the highlands, as it were, of my part of the country, because if we continue on past the reservoir here and we go to the edge, you look down onto the coastal lowlands, you know, just a few feet above sea level. Yeah. That is where I settled. A long time ago now, Mark.
It can't have been that long ago.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Ian and I are married 40 years.
Right.
And all these years later, I just absolutely love the place that I live in. Because when you leave your home, my home, back in the Scottish borders, and you take up a new place to live in, you've got to say to yourself, this is my journey. This is going to be my life now, and I come with hope and expectation. And sometimes those hopes were fulfilled beyond anything I could have dreamed of. But within that, there's lots of challenges.
Well, these connections are often spoken of as if they were only ever ancient and are over. But of course, they're ongoing, they're very much alive.
Yes. And aren't we lucky that the connection can now be maintained?
Because the channel is so short, and it's really easy to come back and forward and to have family on both sides.
That's right.
And to maintain contact with them.
That is right. So I feel as much a part of my home in Scotland as I do here. That's never gone, ever. Never gone. It's a very, very, very strong feeling. I'm being a bit romantic.
Well, having settled here, what do you really enjoy about this varied landscape we have around us?
I love standing down actually on the lowland and looking up at the sheer cliffs of Binevenagh. And then I just need to turn round and I can see the River Row flowing into Lough Foyle, the estuary. It is absolutely wonderful. I feel very privileged actually to have settled in such a beautiful place.
When you got settled here, did you hear words that you were familiar with from back in Scotland?
I did, and they took me quite by surprise because until I came over here, I had no idea that there were such strong Scots links in this part of the country. But muckle was a big one. And I heard somebody being called Thran, which I thought that is a great, great word. And bairn, that was my first introduction to, well, what I came to be known as Ulster-Scots. Yeah, and now I feel I am an Ulster-Scot. And I love to use those words whenever I can.
Well, things like surnames and musical traditions. Did lights start to go off in your head?
Yeah, the sound of the pipes, the massive bagpipe and marching band seen here. A lot of songs were also very Scottish, and then the use of burns, you know, the poetry over here. I had no idea that these connections through literature and music were so strong. And it just makes you feel more at home.
Well, you're such a well-known broadcaster and well-respected broadcaster too, Helen. It was many moons ago when I heard your radio series, the Ulster-Scots, from, I think, 1999.
Oh, that's right.
You know, that material is so important to just capture this story and to share it with other folk.
Yeah, and it was an important time because towards the end of that series, they declared Ulster-Scots as a minority language that went through the European Union, so it was very timely.
It's wonderful, I think, to see community activity on the ground, that this is alive and well and thriving.
Having Ulster-Scots recognised as a culture, as a story of this place is really, really important. Yeah. And you and I both went through times when it was being really very brutally and horribly and aggressively talked about and diminished. And I think we're coming through that. And we're beginning to come out the other end when it is recognised as something to be very proud of. And I am a modern day Ulster-Scot. I made that journey from Scotland here for love and a new life, and I set my roots down here. So I am a modern day Ulster-Scot, and I am really, really proud of that, Mark. I am. I really am. Yeah.
The International Appalachian Trail comes through Binevenagh.
Yeah.
Do you love this landscape?
Well, of course I do. It's where I've settled, it's where I've reared my family, and it is where I will die and be buried. You know, say in my Radio 4 work, I travel all across the United Kingdom, from the Far Orkneys down to the Scilly Isles and everywhere in between. And every time at the end of that journey, when I'm travelling home, I get to the top of the hill and I look down into the Roe Valley. And I just get this immense sense of, I'm coming home now. I'm coming home. Mm.
I've caught up with Mark to follow the trail over the top of Binevenagh.
He's the strong, silent type, isn't he? Who's this guy?
This is Anne McMaster. This is the sea god I was mentioning whenever we were down at Kinbane. And he's standing here, surveying his watery kingdom, looking out across the mouth of Lough Foyle and over to Inishowen. I guess you would say he's almost our answer to Neptune. You know, he's an Irish sea god. He's the son of Lear. He's got all these marvellous props. He's got a horse that can ride over the sea or over the land. He's got a sword called Fragarach, which is deadly to anyone it hits. He has the ability to cast forgetfulness or invisibility with his cloak.
He sounds like a superhero of his generation.
Yeah, he is. And funnily enough, he's had to be super heroic in recent years because some people stole him in about 2015 or thereabouts. He later turned up, vandalised and wrecked, so this is a new one.
Well, it's great that he's right on the trail here again. And even though he's pointing toward Inishowen, we turn our back on the sea. It's time to get through into the forests and mountains of the Sperrins.
Strike out into the Wild West.
Let's get going.
We follow the trail through miles of heathland and bogs before eventually reaching the Sperrin Mountains. This massive mountain range stretches all the way from Limavady to Strabane, sprawling across the counties of Londonderry and Tyrone.
These landscapes are the closest geological match to sections of the Appalachian Trail in North America. Martin Bradley has a deep passion for these mountains and was part of the team that devised the Ulster leg of the International Trail. So, Martin, tell us how the geology of our rocks here in Ulster connects with the geology of the ranges over in America.
The older rocks out to the west, that's Tyrone, Donegal, would really match up with the Appalachian and the rocks coming up through even into the International Appalachian Trail in Canada, because they are really ancient rocks. They're all more than 500 million years old. So they existed before the Atlantic existed. And the Atlantic came about by a tectonic movement, plate tectonics. The Atlantic was formed, and gradually Europe, Africa, and the Americas moved apart. Probably about 1 centimetre or 2 centimetres a year, so it shows you how long they've been travelling apart. Every year, North America is getting about 1 centimetre or 20 millimetres further away from us.
So does that mean that some of the rock along the trail isn't as old as the rest?
Yeah, some of the rock in Northern Ireland is actually quite young, geologically speaking. The older rocks then to the west, County Tyrone, and then going into Donegal are much, much older. They're over 500 million years old, whereas the rock over County Antrim going towards Belfast and the Giant's Causeway is really 60 million years old, and that's basalt. So that's a volcanic rock, and that's quite young, geologically speaking.
Well, our most famous basalt feature is, of course, the Giant's Causeway, which connects with Scotland. But it's high profile. Isn't the whole story about geology here? There's a lot more to discover on this trail.
There's a lot more. I have a map with me here. So you can see the contrast there. All the pinks here are the basalt. And there's even basalt under Lough Neagh, but that's all the basalt that's 60 million years old. It's the surface rock. Whereas the surface rocks in Tyrone and the Sperrins is the much older rock. And that's why it's much more colourful, because there's so many different types of rocks mixed in. And these are the rocks, the exposed rocks of Northern Ireland, that are really connected with North America and the Appalachian Trail and going right through to Newfoundland.
Well, over the last couple of years, I, like loads of people, have rediscovered just the enjoyment of walking. And this trail has taken me to places I didn't even know existed.
Well, that's really what the whole idea of the International Appalachian Trail was to get people into different places and spread the tourism and spread visitors. And it's not all about just maybe going to the Causeway or even the Mournes. So it's thinking west.
Before we carry on with our journey westwards, it's a chance for a much-needed coffee break.
This is the perfect place to end this stretch of the journey. Glenshane Pass one direction, and a showing in Lough Foyle in the other.
Yeah, we've come a long way too since we left County Antrim and crossed the Bann and headed out into the west. And now we're somewhere about the middle top of Ireland.
And the terrain of the trail has changed quite a lot, from sea level in the coast up into the high ground at Binevenagh, and we're still in pretty high ground here.
Yeah, we are indeed, and we've seen some beautiful sights, from the crashing sea to the mountainous landscapes to the beautiful green flatlands beneath us.
To County Tyrone and County Donegal we go.
In the next episode, we'll cover the final leg of the trail and explore some enduring musical connections.
And as we cross the border into Donegal, our journey takes us through the majestic Blue Stack Mountains as we complete our Appalachian adventure.